Dr. Sixer is quite well known in the community as a neuropsychologist, and his private practice is well known in the testing environment. Talks to a lot of kids and helps them understand who they are and what they need to thrive in an educational environment. I'm going to go keep this really brief. Certainly an author of books, an author of many articles. And Ned Johnson is the president and founder of Prep Matters, which works with kids on testing, of course, for SATs and ACTs, but also with some college and high school placements. And again, with both a very nurturing approach and understanding who they are, the brain, how it works, and where they can find much more supports in what works for them. So very, very brief instructions, but I wanted to say thank you so much for speaking with us tonight. I'll let you guys take over.
Delighted to be here.
Very good, thank you.
I make a living testing kids and trying to figure out if they have a problem, what the problem is, and what's going right, what's going wrong, and how to help them. And that is a genius in helping kids prepare for tests and do well on tests.
Never prepared someone for your test.
yeah, this as well. It's interesting that we've been friends for some time, and we see different populations in some way. There's a lot of overlap. Can you hear me in the back?
Yeah.
We see somewhat different populations in the sense that Ned sees a lot more kids than I do who are obsessively motivated. We see a lot of kids with various kinds of motivational issues, and for the spectrum ranging from kids who, one of our shared clients, who you kind of have to peel off the wall, who's just hyper obsessively motivated and so anxious, where the motivation is just, in some ways, it's not very healthy. To the extreme of a lot of kids that I see, which I describe as semi-professional underachievers, who spend about 5 minutes of energy trying to motivate doing schoolwork, and they have a tutor and a parent and teachers, home communication, and a therapist who spend 95 minutes of energy trying to help the kid. And I think that it was really the shared interest in motivational issues, and how do we help kids learn to motivate themselves, and our shared interest in stress. Because that'll tell you that I've been studying the effects of stress on the brain, the developing brain, since 1998 or so, and have lectured about it a lot, written a lot about it, and I see it so much in my work, because I see kids who, a lot of whom have anxiety disorders, a lot of them have autism, which is always associated with anxiety issues, a lot of kids are depressed, a lot of kids who have learning disabilities or ADHD, whose life is stressful. And so I think a lot about it, and Ned sees these kids who are taking these high stakes tests, who are commonly stressed out of their minds. One of the first things he noticed when he started tutoring at the age of 22 was how kids' performance on tests would tank when they're stressed.
It's stunning for me. I mean, as Phil said, I'm a professional tutor geek, I guess. And so I help kids take all these tests and spend a lot of time early on working with bright kids, academic kids, motivated kids, parents are behind them. And then they would go and take a test and get a score that really seemed completely out of whack with what the expectation was of what the kids thought of themselves academically, intellectually, and couldn't quite understand it. And so spent a lot of time since then talking to people like Bill, reading a lot of Carol Dweck and a lot of the things you guys are probably reading, and recognizing how much stress brains just don't work well. Now, for some kids, there are some kids who really only perform well under stress. But a lot of the kids, and I've seen more and more of this, kids who end up sort of being mutual clients with me and with Bill, who have anxiety that leads to the level that is really debilitating. And trying to understand that kind of what anxiety does to cognition, what it does to motivation, and helping kids actually understand that, because oftentimes kids think, well, when things don't go well, they jump to conclusions like, well, I guess I'm just not that smart. I mean, I always had A's and B's all the way through school, and then I get this test. And so what I've spent a lot of my time trying to do is to help kids understand in a more complete way how the brains actually work, and how important this anxiety is. Because if they can think, and oftentimes there's the idea of, well, if I do better on this test, then I'll feel better about myself, or I'll think differently. And what I find is if we can help kids think differently or feel better about themselves, then the performance actually is the result rather than the cause.
And the interesting thing is that I learned some years ago, there's a gal at the University of Montreal who's an expert on stress. And who teaches that there's 4 aspects of life that make it stressful. It's novelty, unpredictability, potential threat, physical threat, or threat. I'll show you. We have, there it is. So Sonia Lukian summarizes with the acronym NUTS. The idea being that stress makes you nuts. And it's novelty, unpredictability, perceived threat to your ego or physical threat, and a low sense of control. And so much of the literature on this topic suggests that the most stressful thing in the universe is a low sense of control. I mean, I was so struck by reading about reading about these rats who they're going to be shocked, and they know they're going to be shocked, and their stress hormones go just through the roof in anticipation of being shocked. Unless you put a little wooden bar in their cage, and you let them chew on the bar in anticipation, they can chew on the bar, their stress hormones go way down because it gives them some sense of control. For years, people in hospitals wouldn't let patients administer their own pain medication because they said that they'll overdose. And what they found, of course, when they actually studied it, was that people who administer their own medication use less medication because that low sense of control of not knowing when the medication is going to come is so freaking stressful that it exacerbates the pain threefold. And so this sense of control is a huge issue in relation to stress. And so much of what we do is dealing with stress-related problems. And also, as we'll talk about in a couple of minutes here, the major theories about motivation, how people become self-motivated, say it's through autonomy. It's through a sense of that I have choice, I have volition. What I do matters. I get to chart my own course here. And so we're trying to figure out, we wanted to write about this stuff. We're trying to think, what's the right angle to go with this stuff? And we hit upon it. I thought a couple of years ago, I think it was just a book on control. I was talking with Ned a year and a half ago. So how should we formulate this? And he said, a sense of control. Let's go with that. We've been thinking about this stuff a lot for the last year and a half. And I find so much of my clinical work now, what I'm trying to think about is if parents are frustrated, if kids are frustrated, how do we increase the sense of control? And so I think that our goal tonight is to talk a little bit about motivation, a little bit about stress, and spend as much time as we can about what are the things you can do that increase the kid's sense of control, that increases your own sense of control. Because I got to tell you, the thing that's most stressful about being a parent is not being able to control your kid. But especially if you think you're supposed to be able to control, then it's really stressful. How many know about the prefrontal cortex? It's pretty well known these days. So it's right behind your forehead. It's the executive part of your brain. And when you're in your right mind, look, I mean, when you're thinking clearly and you can see things in perspective, your prefrontal cortex is regulating the rest of your brain. How many know the amygdala? The amygdala it's a little see that long green, the hippocampus there, it's a little red almond-shaped structure. The amygdala, I think about it like a smoke alarm, but it's a threat alarm. The amygdala is sensitive to the emotional context of your experience, and it's particularly attuned to things that you should be anxious about. If you see somebody who's angry, if you see somebody who's afraid, your amygdala senses that and reacts to it to protect you. So the amygdala is sensitive to threat. And do we have the reward system there? So I'll just tell you, yeah. The nucleus accumbens is also in the middle of your head. There's the structure in the brain's reward system that produces dopamine, and it projects dopamine to the rest of the brain. And dopamine is the neurotransmitter is related to reward. It's related to pleasure, and it's particularly related to anticipation. When you're motivated about something, you have high dopamine levels. When somebody, a smoker, if they can't smoke, they know they're going to be able to smoke in 5 minutes. The dopamine levels go up, through the roof. And when we're pursuing goals, something we're excited about, we have high levels of dopamine. One of the reasons that kids with ADHD have so much trouble focusing on that boring homework is they don't have enough dopamine in their frontal cortex to make it interesting. And one of the reasons that the stimulant medications like Ritalin help the kids do their homework is that it produces more dopamine in the frontal cortex, and then the brain says, okay, this isn't so bad, I can do this. And so I think those are the main things that these three things about the brain. It's really the prefrontal cortex and the amygdala, because when you're stressed, it's really, when you're in your right mind, it's top down. Your prefrontal cortex is regulating the rest of the brain. When you're stressed, then it's bottom up. The amygdala is regulating, because the amygdala is shutting down your prefrontal cortex so you can't think, so you can respond instinctively. You aren't supposed to be able to think. You're supposed to be able to pay attention to something else when you're stressed. You're supposed to pay attention to the stressor, because your amygdala thinks this must be a predator of some kind. And the worst thing in the world, if you're attacked by predators, you start thinking about something else. So we've evolved to not do that.
Well, the thing that's so interesting to me with talking with kids is how fluid it is to sort of slide from one type of thinking to another and not even realize it. I have a son who just turned 13, and about a week ago, and we were working on his homework, and it was a struggle, and he was up too late, which is the only thing in my household that I get upset about. And then in the middle of some stuff, I'm trying to okay, let's get this done, because sleep's really important for you to integrate all this learning and do well on your test tomorrow, and blah, blah, blah. And he starts to get all teary. And I'm like, oh gosh, I pushed too much. I'm like, gosh, I'm a bad father, right? And I'm like, and he's like, and I'm like, I'm sorry, whatever. And he's like, no, it's not that. And I have a very dramatic son, very melodramatic son, really. And he said, it's Chelsea. And I'm like, who the heck? I'm like just turning 13, sort of thinking, who the heck is Chelsea? Well, it turns out my son is a dancer, and so he's been allowed to choreograph a piece for his dance class, and he's very excited about this. But he is also a 13-year-old boy, so he's done exactly half of it. And the rest is going to come along when it comes along. Well, his teacher, who's perhaps a little bit more forward-thinking than my lovely son is, started sort of jumping in and said, we'll give you a few more steps to do. And then Chelsea, who's in his class, sort of gave him a talking to every time the teacher turned his back, like, you should have done, and was just all in his face about it. And so he was feeling very, very upset about this. So at 10 o'clock at night, which is about an hour past what time we wanted to be in bed, and I'm like, so this is really important, Matthew, and I really want to make sure we talk through this and figure out a good solution. But I'm so tired that I really don't know that I'm going to be able to think through this as clear as I'd like. So why don't we, if you can do me a favor, just brush your teeth, put your jammies on, let's hop in bed, we can talk a little bit more, and maybe we can cover this tomorrow. So he goes off and does. I circle back 5 minutes, I come into his bedroom, and he says, when I first think about Chelsea, I get so upset, and I'm so angry, and I'm so frustrated. But when I think about it some more, I realize it's not that big a deal. And I looked at him, and I said, you know why that is? And I said, so Bill's sort of like a minor deity in my household. And I said, so Bill would say, because when you're thinking, Chelsea, it's your amygdala, and you're like, if I want to punch her or do something right, and you don't do that, that's wrong. But when you actually stop and think about it, that's this part of your brain. And the thinking part of your brain can realize, well, it doesn't matter that much. So I sent this off to Bill. I felt like a very proud father, like I'd used the right medicine, right? And Bill writes back, he said, well, tell Matthew that Matthew, it's lovely that at age 12, he turned 13 last Friday, at age 12 that you understand how brains work in ways that most people who are 52 don't understand. And so for me, at least for the work that I do, because I'm constantly with kids who are, all applying to college is stressful, right? And there's so many ways that it matters to them. A lot of things that were on our list there. And so I spent a lot of time just explaining just kind of what Bill just did, so they understand when the cognition is not a switch, right? You don't turn it on and turn it off, right? If you hold a gun to it, I always do this with kids. You talk about dopamine, not a gun to your head, I swear. Sorry, I said that wrong. With dopamine, I was teaching a class last night, I said, I said, I'll bet if I gave you $100 if you got this math problem right, that would be enough for most of you to get pretty excited. And chances are, even if you didn't like math, you'd be really motivated to try hard, right? Oh yeah, that'd be good. I'll take $100. I said, but if I said I'll give you $10,000 if you get this problem right. Oh, and just to make it interesting, let's do this on national television and just see how the TV show You're Smarter Than a Fifth Grader or whatever some years ago. Who would ever do that, right? And I said, then all of a sudden it changes because it's not quite the excitement of taking Ned's money. It now becomes the fear of screwing up, right, and losing $10,000 in front of the whole darn world. And so from my perspective, a little bit of understanding about that can be really helpful to kids because they haven't learned this yet. And all that they know is, I could do it one day and I can't do it the next day. And they jump to places like, gosh, I must not be as smart as I used to be. Is now kind of where we want to be.
I lecture sometimes on the most useful stuff I've learned about kids' brains. And number one is how slow the development, how protracted the development of the prefrontal cortex is, which is typically the cognitive functions of the prefrontal cortex not mature until 25 plus minus 3. If you're male, more likely plus 3. If you have ADHD, it's more like plus 5 or 6. And the emotional regulation functions not fully mature until 32 plus or minus 3. And so knowing this has been the greatest source of hope to parents.
That's what age your kid is.
Well, yeah, 31 not so much.
I just did the math.
But everybody I know, everybody I know has a kid. All my friends have at least, including myself, have one kid, at least one kid, who has been diagnosed with learning disability or ADHD, and kids, they're virtually all late bloomers. And they virtually all have bloomed beautifully after much consternation and fretting and periods where it didn't look like they were going to get there. But this slow maturation of the frontal cortex is probably the most useful thing I've ever learned because I've been able to tell people that if you don't get too anxious and you don't make this worse, that you're going to have a different kid in 2 years or 3 years or 5 years. And I lectured last night and just mentioned that in my own kid, I saw this dramatic change in the way he spoke, in the clarity of his speech between 23 and 26. At 23, he was still a lot stammering, hard to understand at times, word retrieval difficulty. At 26, people described him as eloquent. And I just, the kid who had ADHD and Tourette with multiple tics and language problems, didn't read in the first grade, who is 6 months away from getting a PhD in psychology. And certainly none of his teachers in high school saw it coming. I don't even college people saw it coming. But this is probably the most useful thing I've ever learned about the brain. And the second is this idea, is this thinking about the amygdala as a threat detector. The first kid I told about this was probably 10 years ago. This kid had just a lifelong, he was depressed all his life, basically. And both his parents were depressed for forever, and it's just a really strong genetic vulnerability. And I think that, and I explained to him that if you're anxious, or if you have an anxiety problem as a teenager or an adult, and you get an fMRI scan of your brain that shows brain activation, what lights up the most, which shows up the most consistently, is a hyperactive amygdala. That so many of the kids I see on a scanner, their amygdala would light up like a Christmas tree because it's just so sensitive. And I would guess that a large percentage of kids who go to wonderful schools like Nora, and I love your mission, I love what you do here. And I think that a lot of kids who go here are kids who have sensitive amygdalas. Kids for whom bigger schools, more stressful academic competition, more loud noise and so much going on, it just overwhelms their amygdala. So their stress response goes off all the time, and they need a place in which they feel safe.
And this is a place where kids feel safe. But I would say these are probably the two most useful things that I've learned, to be able to tell kids when you're anxious what it is that your amygdala is just sensitive and is perceiving threat where it doesn't necessarily need to. And so that you tend to overreact to stuff. And what therapy does, what exercise does, what meditation does, is that it allows the prefrontal cortex to better regulate the amygdala. And so after you exercise, after you meditate, you feel more clear, your prefrontal cortex has more regulatory power to kind of tame the amygdala and remind the amygdala that that's not such a big deal. You don't have to overreact.
But I think it's also, I love your point too about plus or minus 3, plus or minus 5. I mean, I tend to work in a world again where everyone wants to be, whatever percentile and kind of everything. I got 2 emails today from my colleague who does kind of intake conversations, and one was from a parent wanting test preparation for her kid's ERB for 3rd grade. Yeah, and I'm like, you don't really do that because it's wrong. Right? Awkward to say to a parent. And the other one was a boy who's in 1st grade and he wasn't reading fluently yet, and they wanted to get a tutor. Now I teach reading comprehension, but that's how to read the SAT version of reading, not 1st grade reading. And I just pulled up. There's just been a study by the Reading Foundation of America. I'm making it up. They was basically talking about the Common Core. You may have seen this in the paper, and how the Common Core is really requiring the kids be able to read at kindergarten age. And the literature basically says this is like the worst idea ever. It's just, I remember when Bill gave a talk 10 years ago, and you were in the middle of some tirade about that, and you said, when I went to college, when I went to school, we were interested in understanding how brains work, right? And then try to design curriculum around them. And the story you told me said, we could design a really exquisite program, a 2-year program, starting with 3-year-olds, and teach them how to ride a bike. At the end of 2 years, 99% of them would know how to ride a bike. Or we could wait until they're 5 and design a 2-week program. Right? And so I think one of the things that happens with kids, and I have kids who are 10 and 13 now, and I feel the same stress that I'm sure all of you feel. But if we have this idea of it's a much wider range of quote-unquote normal, and we don't just fixate on one kid who's, precocious about everything, because when we feel like, oh my gosh, we're already behind, it's a really stressful message to the kid, right? To our son or daughter, that I'm so worried about you that I'm now stressed about where you are. And when I think about a lot of these things, Carol Dweck, you all know Carol Dweck, has a great insight of simply using the word yet.
Did you know how many of
you guys know Carol Dweck? We'll talk about her more. She's a really should I tell them the name? Yeah. So Carol Dweck.
You know what Carol looks like?
So Carol Dweck is a researcher now at Cornell, or at Stanford, used to be at Columbia, I believe, did research. This really sort of seminal study, all sorts of silly things up there. This really seminal study with children in Harlem, a bunch of things, and she sort of stumbled on this idea that there were a bunch of kids for whom, no matter how difficult the task was, they wanted to try it again. Even when she gave it, said, there's no answer to this problem, right? Yeah, I know, but it's kind of fun to try. And her brains were like, what is wrong with these children? Like, who are they? And she came up with the idea of a fixed versus a growth mindset. Okay? And very simply, a fixed mindset is the idea that the abilities that I have, they're genetic, they're born, I inherited them from my mom or dad. It's a fixed quantity. And what I got at birth, that's what I got. Run with it, go for it, prosper. Growth mindset is that you're really not born knowing how to ride a bike, play a piano, speak a language, but with practice, you get better at anything. In case you're unsure, growth mindset is what we want to focus on. She did this study where she basically took a group of 5th graders, gave them all basically the visual spatial puzzles from a 5th grade IQ test, and broke the class right in half. And to this group said, wow, you guys did great. You must be really smart at puzzles. That sounds good. That's nice to hear. And this group over here said, you guys did great in this puzzle. Boy, you must work really hard at this. Doesn't sound quite as good, really, but being told that you're so smart. But it became really interesting. Came back a week later or so and said, hey, you know, we snuck in and we stole the 6th grade IQ test. Do you want to give it a try, or do you want to do some like, you know, random kind of puzzles, activity books? The people who were told they're smart, activity books sound fun. I think we'll stick with that. Because they didn't want to put their label of being smart in jeopardy. These folks said, oh, I can try hard, maybe I can try 6th grade. That'd be kind of fun to conquer that. She then went back a week later and said, we got this exercise. Another school is actually going to be doing the same experience, and we'd like you all to send a quick letter to these students and tell them about the process. And so they wrote their letters. Oh, and by the way, if you want to, at the bottom you can put your score of how you did on this test and just share it with the other people. The folks who were all told they were so smart, they lied about their scores to children whom they were never going to meet. It was anonymous. They just put their score there. These folks are pretty darn accurate. And then the most significant thing is when they came back a month later and gave that whole group of folks another 5th grade test, same level as the first part. These folks, their scores fell because now the stress of I'm going to lose, uh-oh, I was a smarty before, and what if I screw up, was enough for a whole bunch of them to sort of whack their score. These folks all did demonstrably better because they had the message that their success was tied to how hard they worked, which is just a much healthier model. We'll talk about internal versus external locus control in just a second. But one of the great things that I saw talk to Dr. Brooke gave a year ago, she said, if you deliberately use the word yet. So I have a daughter, I'm no good at this. I said, well, not yet. I don't want to see, because you just say, oh no, you're great at this. Well, I don't think that's a great thing because it creates a cognitive dissonance. Because my daughter feels that she's no good at it, and daddy's telling her, no, you're brilliant at this, right? Well, is she wrong? Is her self-assessment wrong, or am I lying? No. So yeah, you missed a few of those, yeah, but you're not there yet. I mean, it's the idea, there's a great piece in the Chronicle of Higher Education where it talked about, we in America think about the ability to do math as the ability to do it quickly. So the person who can spit out the answer, she must be the smartest. As opposed to the ability to do math is the ability to do it well. And because everyone has a different stress profile, I may just seize up in that moment and not be able to multiply whatever I can multiply. And so if we can talk with kids and they bungle this, that, the other, that's kind of part of life. And so yeah, you're not there yet. And it simply opens up the whole opportunity of how can we get to knowing how to ride a bike, do math, whatever it happens to be. It's pretty patient.
Let's see the so just from a stress, the major take-home points about stress are basically that when you're stressed, you can't think. You aren't supposed to be able to think, right? Because Amy Arntzen, who studies the frontal cortex, says that the frontal cortex is the Goldilocks of the brain, meaning that the neurotransmitters that run it, which are dopamine and norepinephrine, they have to be in a very delicate balance for you to be able to think clearly. You think about how easily your attention is disrupted. If you've got a sick kid, it's hard to concentrate. If you think that your boss may be a little frustrated, it's hard to concentrate. Because once that stress response is activated, your brain gets flooded with dopamine and norepinephrine, and it can't think. And I tested a very anxious kid today, and when I tell most kids, which is as soon as you start to perceive stuff as hard, I say, I just want you to know that you've already done the one for kids your own age, the one you're doing now for kids who are older than you are. So I don't expect you to be able to get these, but you might. You earn the right to try. When I tell kids, tell them that I don't expect you to get this, that it takes away the fear of failing, because I won't be stupid. They'll try anything. I'd say the most dramatic illustration of this way of stress affects your ability to think. I tested this kid some years ago who was in 5th grade and was getting kicked out of class for meltdowns in a public school 3 times a week. And I worked with him in the morning. I found him to be a very delightful kid. With me, he was in a really good mood. He was wonderful with my little dog, Ernie. And then in the afternoon, he worked with my psychology associate, who was good. He was fine until she gave him math.
When he started doing some calculation problems, he just started to get so stressed, he literally started hissing at her and making clawing motions and just real primitive stuff. And she says, okay, I think we're done. And she walks away. She walks away, comes to get me. And literally, this kid's like a caged animal. He's pacing in the waiting room because he knows that when he's done testing, he can go to Toys R Us. But he also knows that he can't go to Toys R Us until he's done testing. And so I paced with him a little bit because we're talking. I said, explain to him about what happened in his amygdala. It perceives threat, and the threat was you're going to feel so stupid. You're going to look stupid in front of this person, so you got to get out of here. And what we have to do, we have to talk back to your amygdala and say it's just not that big a deal. We also, your amygdala will fire unless you feel safe. I said, I know you feel safe with me. I know you feel really safe with Ernie, my dog. I said, I got a couple of minutes. Just come back to my office. I'll put Ernie right next to you. Ernie was deaf and blind at that time. He was pretty accommodating. But so there's literally, this kid comes to my office, and he's petting my dog. And within 90 seconds, he's doing the same math problems, humming to himself. It was so dramatic. And we know that from a neurological point of view, the optimal condition for learning is relaxed alertness. That's how we learn. And so much of what Ned tries to do is help kids to take into a testing situation this feeling of relaxed alertness and confidence. And I'll just tell you that regarding the stress and mental health piece, that there's a gal at San Diego State. Her name is Jean Twenge, and she's compared the responses of contemporary kids, college students and high school students, on the Minnesota Multiphasic Personality Inventory, which was developed in the 1930s, and the adolescent version in the 1950s. And what she found was that young people in 2007 were reporting more symptoms of anxiety. They were 5 to 8 times more likely to report symptoms of anxiety disorders or depression as kids as young people at the height of the Great Depression, during World War II, during the Vietnam War. And I think that we live in just a particularly anxious and reactive society. And I think that all of us have kids where stress-related issues are a big deal. And as I said earlier, that Ned and I have been focusing so much on the sense of control because it's the thing that allows us not to feel stressful. If you got a problem, and here's what you should do. That's what we want. And we're going to get to that in just a few minutes here, what to do. But that's what you want, because then I have a sense of control and I'm not so stressed. And also, I see so many underachievers where, as I said before, they're spending 5 units of energy or trying to help themselves, and they got other people spending 95 units to try to help them.
What's your story about the student who pretend to go upstairs?
Oh yeah, 25 years ago, this is probably the biggest underachiever. This is one of the few kids I've ever tested. I couldn't find anything wrong. I couldn't. He was good at everything, but he was flunking most of his stuff, his classes, and he was in 8th grade. And so I said, so tell me about a typical evening. He says, well, like from 5:30 to 6 we have dinner, and then from 6 to 7:30 I pretend to do my homework. and this guy, like so many kids I see, had a tutor and he had a therapist and he had parents behind him constantly trying to work. And there was a homeschool program where the teachers had to sign off that he was bringing his homework in, was turning it in, and parents had to sign off that he did it. And when I did, I asked parents, if he doesn't turn in an assignment, I asked the kids, who's most upset if you don't turn in an assignment? Oh, my mom, or my teacher. And the kids are always the last. They're always the last. and I think that these 2 kids I mentioned, this kid that was so obsessively motivated to go to this particular Ivy League school, and another kid I haven't told you about, but who is another serious underachiever. What they have in common in this part is this girl, who is a shared client, just has her focus that the only way I can possibly be successful and fulfilled in my life is that I go to this college. And she has almost zero control over whether she gets to this college. And so I talked to her for a bit, and I said, the best I could do, I don't do therapy anymore, the best I could do was say, we need to adopt Plan B thinking. We have to start thinking about if that's a fine first choice, but we have to start thinking about Plan B, because when you have a Plan B, then it increases your sense of control, and it's not so stressful.
You know, it was really helpful with her, Bill.
What's it?
I saw in the paper today, there's a whole thing in the style section about Malia Obama and her college visiting. Did people read about this? And so this student is hell-bent on one of two Ivy League schools, and if she doesn't go there, you just can't be successful in life unless you go to an Ivy League school, I guess. But Malia, one of the schools on her list is NYU. And so my student's like, we have a Plan B, so. Oh, it's unbelievable. She's like, really? I mean, the president's daughter might go to NYU? You know, I'm sure they'll feed you there too. Teach you stuff, whatever.
I heard they had textbooks too.
Yeah. It's a pure thing.
Yeah. So, this Jean Twenge, who I mentioned, the interesting thing was that she also has compared, some of you know this construct of locus of control. So an internal locus of control is you have the sense that what I do matters. I mean, my actions matter. I can determine the course of my life in large part. And an external locus of control is basically that I am where I am because of what you did or my mom did, or it's kind of, I'm at the whim of external forces. And there's just hundreds of studies that document how useful it is to have an internal locus of control. And what she found was that contemporary kids have much more external locus of control than they used to. Yeah.
So, it's my daughter to a T, who goes to lab school. So how do you help them develop an internal locus of control?
We're going to go there in just I think that we're going to go there in just a minute, because I want to spend most of this talk talking about that. But just so, Ned, do you want to talk about the social response?
Social media?
No, the Destiny Ryan here.
Oh, yeah. So,
From a motivational point of view, this is really very
really, yeah. Oh, this is.
Oh yeah, narcissism is also on the rise here. If you can't even see, yeah. If you haven't seen this, this is. People ask me, is that a real? I don't know. If it is, I'd sure love to be the person who had the guts to do it.
So Bill and I are both big fans of Verghese and Richard Ryan, the model of what's called self-determination theory. If anyone has read Dan Pink's book Drive, it's basically this, without complete attributions, I see it. But both books are really good. But it's a very simple and very elegant model that in order to be internally motivated and also to have a kind of appropriate measure of anxiety. And this is called the Yerkes-Dodson law. And so if you can see this over here, this is performance on the y-axis. It's been a while since you did math. That goes up and down. And the x one goes across the bottom, and it's arousal level. And this is measured in something called cortisol. It's a stress hormone. And what happens is, if the arousal level is really, really low, so is your performance. So like if you're clinically depressed, you basically no cortisol. I can hold a gun to your head and be like, whatever, right? Teaching this class last night, last year, remember, had like 8,000 snow days? We had that one time, it was like a snow day on a Thursday, and you just knew there was not going to be any school until Monday, right? So if you tried to talk to your kids, so if you start that term paper, like, vampire diaries, right? I mean, no one's doing it, no way. But as the arousal level gets higher, so does performance, right? So if you have kids who are athletes, right, occasionally play against a team who is just god-awful, right? And how do you play against a team that's god-awful? Usually, yeah, not so great. If you're really going to play your best, you want to play against someone who's really just as good as you are, maybe a little bit less so you know you're going to win, but someone who puts you on your toes, right? The problem is the arousal level starts to go out, the performance falls, right? And this is back to my $100 versus $10,000 thing. Significantly, this curve is different for different people based on their experience, based on their competency, right? So if you're a professional athlete, you can handle much higher levels of stress than if you're not a professional athlete. Bill is very comfortable with public speaking because he's done this roughly 1,000 times, right? Where most people are more afraid of public speaking than they are of dying in that one. So some level of stress is, so we basically in the middle is eustress. It's good stress, right? It actually helps us perform. But if you go that far out, you get distress. So a little bit of stress is good. So DC and Ryan talk about having an appropriate level of stress, so it's manageable stress, and really help you perform at your best. And enough stress that you're internally motivated, that I don't need someone else to yell at me to get me to do this. Just the thought of doing, say, yeah, it matters to me that I do well on this paper that I'm writing. It matters to me whether I'm well prepared for the song that I'm going to sing. I need competency and relatedness and autonomy. So competency is the thing that we as parents in DC area tend to focus most on. I really want to make sure you're the best soccer player so you can get on that travel team in second grade so you can play in the Olympics. I'm teasing, but you've seen that, right? Relatedness is simply that I feel some sense of connection to this thing that I'm trying to achieve and to the people in charge of this, right? It's real. If you know this with your kids, asking the students, the first question I always ask is, so what's your favorite class? And some of them will say math, I love math, and some will say English, and someone will say it depends. And I don't even have to ask depends, but I always do. And so what's it depend on? And they will, of course, say the teacher, right? It makes a huge difference. I had this girl in 8th grade who she was in an independent school, and she'd been a straight A student in 5th grade, and then in 6th grade was an A- student, 7th grade was a B+, 8th grade was a B. Parents were not excited about this trend line. And so I sat down with them and had a big conversation. We talked through everything we could talk about and asked her to go kind of class by class by class, and she talked about her English teacher. And so, okay, and so what about English? Tell me about English. She said, I hate that man. And it wasn't like, he's pretty lousy, he's not good at his job, the school should fire him. It was visceral. And it's like, I am not going to work harder for that guy, because he just sucks. You're like, you need a different motivation. Winning, whatever. And then autonomy is really, really important. It certainly ties back into the Carol Dweck idea that if I have a sense that what I do can actually make a difference. There are some kids, who basically, they're not going to study more because they say it doesn't really make a difference if I study or not. And I've had kids where that's true because they really don't know how to study. So studying ineffectively for 3 hours rather than 2 hours, why would I do that? I got the same grade that I got yelled at about, right? But having a sense of autonomy, our world is by and large driven by adults. Anyone read about the MCPS, and the sleep starting later, right? So all the experts in the world, American Pediatric Association said, school day should start at 8:30. And MCPS looked at the literature and they thought hard and they interviewed everybody there was to interview, and they said,
20 minutes.
20 minutes later, good luck with that. So when I talk with kids, I say, yeah, it is important for you to know, and I'm sorry about this, but your world has basically been made by and for adults, and we just act like it'll be fine. But when kids feel that they have a sense of control, it makes a huge difference. A huge part of my work is simply just making up a plan with their input and say, we agree on this plan, and then we're going to deliver this to mom or dad. And then just knowing that there's some plan, to Bill's point, some plan to execute makes a huge, huge difference. Bill told the story about rats, and whether being shocked. When I was in college, I had a really rough year. I come from a family of depressants. I was very depressed my sophomore year. I took the year off from school, and my dad connected me with a guy named Robert Saisi. He's now deceased. He was this famed educator in the state of Connecticut. He was both a physician and a psychiatrist. And I can't remember much of what he told me, except he told me this story that he had been a prisoner of war in the Korean War for 2.5 years and systematically tortured. And he was the most gentle man you've ever met. And he explained that when he knew they were coming to torture him, he would take a sliver of wood out of the floorboard and he would jam it into his own lip. And so when they hauled him down to do whatever god-awful things he was going to do, he could manipulate that splinter in his own lip and focus on that rather than whatever else was going on. I'm like, okay, so sense of control. I'm not encouraging that for your children. Oh, can you read this? I love the New Yorker. we've been thinking a lot about what we want you to do with your life.
What we want to do with your life.
Thank you. So this is kind of what DC and Ryan say the model should look a little bit like. But when we get anxious and we think, oh my gosh, you're not fully fluent in 3 languages in first grade, we better get you a Spanish tutor or whatever. One more slide. It can feel to kids like that. I have this lovely, lovely, lovely kid who's she's a senior now. She's done with her work with me, and she's my favorite child in the last 5 years. We're going through all this stuff last year. She's one of those highly selective independent schools, and she said, my parents have always trusted me to do my own work. And she had a GPA of 3.8 at a school that's very hard to get a 3.8. She said, and then in junior year they turned on me. Well, tell me more about that. Well, now they're constantly asking me all the time, what are you doing on top of that? And they're just on top of me all the time. And the more they ask, the less I want to do it. So then you have a problem, it seems to me, is if she has this level of internal motivation when her parents did nothing, right? But when they start pushing and her motivation starts falling, how much do they have to push to make up for the internal motivation that she already had in abundance?
There's so much interesting research on this. And Ned told me that a lot of kids that he sees said stuff like, it feels to me like my parents care more about my achievement than they do about me.
Oh,
yeah. But the interesting thing about this research is that if kids have if they're in school and they have a system, you can do it this way, or you can figure out the best way to do it. They'll work harder, they'll take on more challenges, they'll take more risks if they have a sense of autonomy. And the beautiful thing about independent schools, in part, is that teachers have a lot of autonomy. Where they don't in public school, it's just so stressful now to be a teacher in public school, they have no autonomy. And we know that kids will learn better, they'll try harder, they'll work harder when they have a sense that they have some choice about stuff. And we also know, just from the very early studies on using rewards to get stuff to do stuff, if kids like to draw, and you started rewarding them for drawing, they wouldn't want to draw anymore. Because it now feels like you're trying to control me, and that's stressful for me. And rewards, in some ways, rewards tend to be stressful for us because the part that the amygdala senses that we're trying to be controlled. And so I mentioned last night that my daughter is I got a brilliant daughter who was really motivated. I offered $100 for a seat when she was in high school, just so she could have the experience. It wasn't that big a deal, But I think that from a motivational point of view, is having a sense of autonomy is crucial. And let's talk now about what the sense of control, how you do it. You want to?
Sure.
But that's sure. The kind of the basic. That's the basic groundwork. And certainly, I'll just say that over the years, when I first moved here, I meant to tell the story last night. When I first moved here, I remember meeting with a family where they had an 8th grader, and the mom cried because the 8th grader didn't have any intellectual interest. And as somebody who didn't have any until I was almost 19 years old, we thought it was kind of stupid to have intellectual interest, or kind of weird, and that it was a little hard. I came from the West Coast. This is a different and I found myself that I mentioned last night that arguably the most useful, certainly in the top 10 most useful things I ever learned was in 1992. That I was talking to a professor from Prince George's Community College, and I said, what do kids have to do to get into PG Community College? And he said, nothing, it's open enrollment. And I said, well, if they finish 2 years there, what happens? Most of them go to Maryland. And then I said, if they get a degree from Maryland, does it say on the diploma that it's been the first 2 years of PG Community College? No, it's just a regular degree. So I learned that you don't need a high school degree. Go to college. And whenever I see underachievers, and I see a lot of kids who are struggling in school, who lack motivation, one of the first things that I tell them is that you can flunk all your courses in high school. And if you decide, gee, maybe, what was I thinking? I'd like to have an education. You can go to Montgomery College, and you can take about 30 credits, and then you can apply to Harvard. They want to see your high school transcript, and you can apply. You're automatically you get a University of Maryland if you have 60 credits. And for so many kids I've seen, just knowing that if they aren't doing well in school, they haven't screwed up their whole life is a very liberating thing. And I find myself trying to disabuse kids of the notion that somehow it's only the top students who are going to be successful in this world. And because so many of the kids I see, it's kind of what's the point of trying? Because I know that all the good things are going to be taken by those kids who are so much stronger students than I am. And so it's just stuff, it's just about some of the top students become most successful adults, that high school grades. But literally, when I was in 8th grade, a friend of mine was in a gym class, and we had a really macho gym teacher who said, well, you guys can screw around this year, but next year you start high school, and your grades are going to follow you the rest of your life. And honest to God, my friend was a very nervous boy, but he was hospitalized. He got so anxious, and his mother was away, instead of period. There's some other circumstances, but he was a very nervous boy anyway. But he literally, he had to go to like a day treatment program for a week because this idea was so terrifying to him that everything mattered. And then when you find out, well, oops, forgot to say it.
You're just kidding. My bad.
Yeah, you know, these kids in this area who think that the only way you possibly be successful is go to elite college, even though people at Princeton who studied this and find out that it doesn't seem to matter very much where you go to college. If you think about most successful people, they don't go to elite schools. And I just don't know why we can.
I can pick on a friend. My colleague Jeff over here is a college counselor, and a guy in my shop who is arguably the best tutor I've ever met. I'd like to think I'm close to him. And they both went to University of Pittsburgh, right? And so these families are working with my colleague. It's like, it must be Harvard, Yale, or Princeton, and there are lovely places you went there. I'm not trying to cast aspersion, but there are other places to go, right? And all these families, and I think if half of them knew that Sunghi had gone to Pitt, they might have been like, we didn't want you associated with it.
So in any case, there's a lot of stuff that if our kids are not doing well, we want to disabuse them. And my own kid, when he wasn't reading in first grade, was not a very good student. I was sure that he knew that there's hardly any great correlation between your grades and your success in life, and that there's almost no correlation between how much homework you do and how much you learn, and various things like that. And like many kids, he's a beautiful late bloomer. But I think so much of what I do and what Ned does is trying to increase this sense of autonomy, sense of control in young people and their parents. And so let me tell you, I think, especially for adolescents, the place to start is by insisting that adolescents make important decisions about their life. And I think that from the time they're little, what we want to do is be giving kids the message that really you're the expert on you, that nobody knows you as well as you know yourself. And that I think that our mission as parents, it's not like we know who our kids are supposed to be. We just don't. The more I do this, the more I'm humbled that I don't know what's in kids' best interests. Some of the biggest things that felt like the biggest failures in my life turned out to be wonderful opportunities. And it's the same way with kids. We just don't know. We can't know. They can't know either. But I think that it goes better if we shift into this mode of thinking of ourselves as people who are supporters of our kids. And I wrote about this in 1986. I wrote a couple pieces on homework. And I basically said to parents, to tell your kid, I love you too much to fight with you about it. And that I'm willing to do anything I can to help you, but I'm not going to fight with you about it. And I'm not going to act like somehow it's my job to see you do it well. Because if I do that, I'm going to weaken you. Because I'm going to be reinforcing the idea that somebody other than you is responsible for your own learning. And I think that so it's not a you're on your own, buddy kind of message. The message is that I respect you. I respect that this is your life. I respect that this is your education, and I want to help in any way I can. But if I Buster, it's time to do this, you can't go out this way because you haven't done your homework. And I see so many kids going to college who've had to be micromanaged to get through high school. And invariably, they're out of college within somewhere ranging from 3 weeks to a semester. And I think that we want to practice saying to kids that acknowledge, respectful. I start with the assumption that kids have a brain, even little kids, they have a brain in their head and they want their life to work. They want their life to work. And if you start with that assumption, that kids have a brain in their head and that they want their life to work, and that we don't know ultimately what's in our kids' best interest. Yes.
I have a question with it. How do you allow them that control and freedom if they have ADD and are constantly being distracted? Because I get what you're saying, like that's great, but giving my daughter the control to do whatever she wants to do, and I would love for her to do that, she won't get distracted, and so I feel like we can keep her on task, but now I don't want to be.
So here's it's real simple for me. You say to her, honey, I know it's really hard for you to stay on task because you've got ADHD. Can I help? Do you want me to, does it help you? Do you have me here? Do you want me to remind you every 5 minutes? Like I set a timer. And so what I suggested in this article that I wrote about homework in 1986 was, parents, think about yourself as a consultant to your kid. And then obviously, when kids are 5 years old and they want to walk across a busy street, you don't say, you grab their hand. This is not absolute. But I think as much as we can, this is what we want to do. And so, there's a woman who wrote a book with her husband called How to Deal with Your Acting Up Teenager. So I still love this book. It was written in the 1980s, I think, and it's probably out of print by now. I called one of the authors about it, who takes this kind of point of view. And I said, does this apply to kids with ADHD? And she said, Bill, I think it applies to everybody because it's simply a matter of treating people respectfully. Like, this is her life. And if you say to her, that I know, and what I used to, it's the same thing with rewards. But I say, I don't believe in bribing kids to do stuff. But with kids with ADHD, I say to them that I know that when you look at this assignment, you don't have enough dopamine going to your frontal cortex. And I know that if I said to you, okay, you finish this work and we're going to Disney World, that you'll get it done in 15 minutes because that Disney World's going to jack up your dopamine level. I said, I'm willing to provide an incentive to you if it helps you. But I'm not bribing you to do it for me. So I think with kids with ADHD, it's the same thing. And again, if the kid says, help me please, get me a tutor, and I need an ADHD coach, I want to provide everything I can. And what I suggest to parents is you set your own consulting hours. So you say to your kid, I'm available to help you between 7:30 and 8:30. But I'm not going to chase you around the house. I'm not going to act like it's my job to somehow get your butt in the chair and get the stuff done. And I think that I've never seen, when energy is from the parent down, it never gets better. The kid never becomes more responsible until the parents get worn out and give up. And so it's not saying, you're on your own, honey, but I'm washing my hands of this. The message is that this is your life. And the message is that this is your work. Is there some way I can help? And I think for the time they're little, when kids are struggling, we ask ourselves, whose problem is it? And I think it's very hard that the correct right answer is that the ADHD is her problem. And I respect and love her kids. And that if we say to them, it's her problem, then how can we help? And if we offer help and they don't want it, then we say, I have confidence in your ability to learn from your mistakes if you make a mistake.
What if your 14-year-old freshman daughter says, I do my best work, Mom, between 11 and 1 p.m., 11 p.m. and 1 a.m. That's when I get my best ideas, especially the night before the papers due.
I'll take a crack at it too, because I've been blathering.
You know, it is interesting. I mean, we're back to that performance curve. There's some people, I mean, I have kids who say, I perform best under pressure. And it's like, the reality is, you only perform under pressure. You only perform under pressure. So for a couple things jump to mind. One, it may be that in some way she's waiting for her parents to fall asleep, you know, and then we'll do it on her own. I mean, do you help her with her essays, or is it all up to her? It's all on her. I mean, I tend to talk, I mean, I've started with my kids since they were 4 or 3, and the only thing I talk endlessly about is sleep. Because, among other things, the amygdala is about 60% more reactive when you're sleep deprived. Right? So if you want your prefrontal cortex and all the thinking and all the planning and all the motivation and self-control that says, no, don't respond to Facebook, you gotta get this darn essay done. That part of your brain, the prefrontal cortex, it's not there, right? And so they're that much more vulnerable to, well, just one more quick game of whatever, one more YouTube video. So I tend to try to really push at kids a lot of articles about, I mean, there's if you have kids who are athletes at all, there's this great article, we can put this on the list, and it was Atlantic Monthly, it was Sleep Doctor to Athletes. And this is the sort of big frontier with performance, athletic performance, is sleep. So they had this thing where they took, this is Stanford, and they basically paid these basketball players to sleep. So like 10 hours of sleep, because they really wanted to go out and do what they do. And their free throw shooting percentage went up by 9 percentage points as to the three-point shooting. My favorite part is their average maximum speed increased by 17%, if you think of total speed. So, I have kids who don't, I have kids, they couldn't care less about their academic performance, but when I talk about their athletic performance, all of a sudden they care. In that article, there's one that the writer says, and then the line that made every man in the audience sit up straight was that, you love this, 2 nights of 5 hours of sleep or less wax men's testosterone level as if they'd aged 11 years. Okay? So all my students would look like, I don't get that guy. Are you kidding? No, I'm not doing that, right? And so one of the challenges, of course, is that there are all sorts of things that you've told her and shared with her, and she just backs it away and backs it away and backs it away. My daughter was something my son was saying, I can't remember exactly what the detail was, but he'd watched a video in his health class, and he starts talking about this. And my daughter said, that's great, and I've talked about this like 15 times, but because they saw it in health class, it had to be true. And I'm like, so one of my jobs is I'm just like I'm a sock puppet, right? And parents like, so here's what's going on at home, and I'm like, got it, and I just pull from articles and sort of slide it by them. And because, an expert, of course, usually comes from more than 500 miles away and never, ever, ever lives under the same roof. So with that, it would be worth trying to, the literature is pretty darn clear on sleep deprivation. And the real challenge is if she's sitting there, one of my favorite pieces about sleep deprivation, classically, in case you don't know, sleep deprivation is 2 weeks of only 6 hours of sleep a night. And they compel people to do this. If that's any of you, I'm really sorry. And then they test everything. And basically everything you can measure falls apart when you're clinically sleep deprived. But in this one study, the great part was they said, so does self-perception. So they're giving people all these studies and testing their creativity, math, and problem solving, and verbal treatment, blah, blah, blah. They say, well, how do you think you're doing? How do you think you're doing? How do you think you're doing? And everyone's like, I'm pretty tired, but I feel like I'm doing well. And it's like, not at all. So the problem is your daughter may really believe that she's doing her best work then.
But the issue is, are there people who are really wired? People who are, they really have night owl wiring. And I think that it's looking like there probably are people. And again, from my angle then, that your role is to help her figure out how do you live with this in a society that is basically operates according to the light dark cycles of the universe. And I think that for many kids, it's finding an alternative so they aren't constantly sleep deprived, as you're saying. It's finding alternative ways to get that kind of mental charge. And some people, it may be vigorous exercising for 20 minutes and then sitting down to work. It's also, so I think that for some people, it's taking melatonin earlier in the evening and then being well rested, and then finding ways to stimulate themselves. But I take seriously the fact that there are kids who just are, and they're not tired until later. And then the challenge is, as opposed to try to make them go to bed, is to try to help them figure out how to be a collaborator and help them figure out how do you live with this. Yeah.
But also, for her, the procrastinating is the stimulant. As you said, with sometimes you reward a child, you can go to Disneyland if you finish your homework, right? So that promise of a reward is a stimulant. But also another stimulant is, I have 2 hours to write this paper, I want to get a decent grade on it. If you said that to yourself a week ahead of time, it wouldn't have the same stimulant effect. So it is true that I think for many procrastinators, they do indeed need the pressure as a stimulant.
I think that's a brilliant point. And certainly, many people with ADHD are very aware. They're very aware that they use procrastination as a way to change their brain chemistry in order to, because they can't really focus and engage until they have some sense of urgency.
Right.
So it's complicated. And what I recommend to most people who seem to not be stimulated not until later is to try to get more sleep, take melatonin to go to sleep, and then find other ways to try to stimulate the brain, whether it's headstands, whether it's meditation or vigorous exercise, to try to stimulate the brain. And then other thoughts is this idea that I want teenagers to be making the decisions about their own life. I think the best message that we can give to adolescents is I have confidence in your ability to make decisions about your own life. And if you make mistakes, to learn from them. And I felt my whole career, I don't think it's ever been wrong that if we start with this assumption that kids, that they want their life to work, and we take this respectful attitude towards it, and how can I help you? I don't want to make this decision for you. I want to weigh in. I want you to practice making decisions before I say before you leave home. Then your thoughts about this idea?
Well, I mean, one of the sort of buzzwords for the last 4 or 5 years really has been resilience, right? Resiliency, and how important that is for kids to go forward in life. And of course, from my perspective, the way that we develop resiliency is really having things go not so hot, right? And then be able to fix them and realize, hey, I got through that, right? I mean, I would imagine that everyone in the room has had some period of life where something went really, really bad, whether it was an illness or an injury or a loss of a job or a bad decision. And we wouldn't necessarily want to relive those things, but I assume that most of us wouldn't want to get rid of those. I mean, or not have had those experiences. I think that most of us are relatively proud of the scars that we bear because they make us kind of who we are. And partly for me, I mean, I have a sort of a complicated family background. My father was an alcoholic who drank himself to death, and my mother was mentally ill. And so I spent a lot of time now with parents who are very, very stressed out. And my perspective is like, that ain't nothing. Which is unkind, but also having lived through some things that were some really awful stuff. When you live through some awful stuff and you own that, from my perspective, it gives me more courage, perhaps foolhardy to sort of dive into things and say, well, I think I can handle this. I have an identical twin brother who's a paramedic. I always wanted to go to medical school because of his own challenge. That didn't happen. But I've now 3 times been on scenes where he has dealt with the kind of things that paramedics deal with. We were just driving along and really, really rough stuff. And I watch him sort of jump into action. And it's just like, holy smokes, it's like a superpower, right? That when someone have a heart attack and someone's like bleeding in place you don't want to be bleeding, right? And he's like, I can take care of this. It's like, man, oh man, oh man. And I worry, at least in the kids that I so often work with, I feel like these parents who pick up their children, it's one thing when they're 4, but something else when they're 14, and they're sort of like, 26.1 miles, and can't go any further. And they put them down, and they go, and then the kid runs the last 10th of a mile, and they get out, and hey, like the kid's going to believe that they did that work themselves, right? And so, to your question, I have a son. My son is delightful, a little inattentive. I have this story. Actually, can I read this? This is very funny. This is my my wife is the most organized, educated, brilliant person I know. And my son is what I think we used to call dreamy. And so this was last week, and I ran this by both of them, so I have a signed consent form. And so my wife said, "What's going to take to get you to wake up and get your homework done in a timely manner?" My son said, "Well, you told me that 511 times. So what makes you think the 512th made the difference?" And my wife says, "It's true, bud." And my son says, "I'm thinking there, she's doing it again. She can't stop herself. She's trying to defend herself." So I say, "Well, you're not going to like this, but the definition of insanity doing the same thing. Don't you hate when kids throw things back at you? Same thing over and over, expecting different results." So essentially, this conversation is insane. Perhaps, I guess, right? And my lovely, lovely wife says, "It's a good point. I'm sorry. I just can't seem to stop myself. It drives me crazy to constantly watch you fail at your homework." And he says, well, technically it's my life, right? And so it should bother you if I fail. But biologically, I guess that's what moms do. And of course, and so it's fascinating because I can hear his frustration. I certainly see her frustration. But I also hear all of this love, right? I mean, my wife, I'm sure she'd rather be sitting around just drinking wine and watching, Downton Abbey rather than sort of doing your homework, right? And so we've had this sort of episode for the last 6 months of really trying to get him to be responsible for this and trying, from my perspective, trying to take the long view on this. Because I couldn't care less what happens next year. I really care, what's he look like when he's 25? And it's, for all I know, I drive home and I get wiped out by a cement trick on the way home, and that's the end of Ned, and that's the end of bye-bye daddy, and I'd hope my kids would be upset, at least for a while, right? But then you hope they sort of get up and say, well, how do I carry on, right? And if you have the sense that without dad, I can't do this, I'm lost, I'm screwed, game over, is not, of course, where any of us want to be. And it's just so hard partly because we have these fully developed prefrontal cortexes. We take, oh my God, my son got up 62 on a history test the other day. Whoops, turned out that wasn't great. But if you extrapolate that, you think, oh, he's going to work at McDonald's, he's going to be homeless, right? No one's ever going to love that child. And of course, it turned out there were some really good reasons for why, he missed a class, he didn't go back to the teacher, there were all sorts of things that we figured out. It's like, okay, so he's a singer. When you sing and you miss class, what should we do next time? Think. I should probably go talk to my teacher, make sure she gives me the assignment. That would seem to be a good solution, right? But what my wife in her frustration would occasionally do, start asking herself, well, what happened? Doesn't strike me as the spirit of inquiry, really. You know what I'm saying? It's sort of like an accusation with a question mark at the end, right? And so it is so hard not to, because I lived this too, right? To think, I always got A's in school. That's who I was, right? But my son is different, and try to okay, and again think that we're playing chess, not checkers, right? And we're not trying to get this assignment done. It doesn't matter what happens tomorrow, or a week from now, or even a month from now. We're trying to think that longer-term perspective. And so when things really go crash, to be able to say, well, okay, so let's talk about that. I think Bill's, the idea of the consultant manager is so important. One of the sort of follow parts of that, though, is how incredibly important it is to be, as a parent, to really be a non-anxious presence. There's sort of two thoughts on that. One, for a lot of our kids, the real world can be kind of stressful, right? And things don't always go well. And you get in fights with boyfriends, girlfriends, the teacher, you get cut from the soccer team, whatever it happens to be, right? And so if our kids come home and I sort of interrogate, well, what do you mean you got a D on that? I mean, why and my kid feels my stress and has to respond to that, well, over time I worry that he'll simply stop telling me when things don't go well. And that's my biggest goal, is that as parents, there's nobody who knows your kid better than you do. There's nobody who loves your kid more than you do. Teenagers, of course, have an inclination to sort of rebuff, parental wisdom as just, you experience that. But to try to maintain that posture so that we're less anxious, so they can feel that they can come home sort of and be safe. But also, so that we cannot have our amygdala sort of jump in and we make sort of rash decisions. And we can really think more creatively and maintain that control control. I have this story, you can tell the story of this kid in, it was at Montgomery County School, this is 8 years ago. She was trying to get national merit on the PSAT. She was a good student, good test taker. And a lot of hard work went into it. And so she took the test on Wednesday morning. She showed at my office later that afternoon. And this total hangdog look. I'm like, oh man. Like, well, what happened? Oh, I got stuck on this problem, and then I ran out of time, and I mean, it's impossible. I know I can't get a perfect score. I'm sorry. I know I worked really hard. But here's the deal. If you got a perfect score on the PSAT, that's great. But you know what? The one that really matters is the SAT. And if you somehow misspelled everything, or there's the SAT for college admissions, right? If you got a 0, not that you can do that, right? Guess what? You still have to take the SAT. So this is feedback. We'll figure out how to apply this going forward. And she's just sitting there, and I go, what else is going on? When I got out of the test, I was so upset. I called my mom. That would be a natural thing to do when you're upset, right? And my mom's like, I can't believe after all the time and money you spent on this, you would screw it up like this. Well, I can understand that must have been really hard. When your mom really wants you to be successful, and I think that wasn't one of her finer moments. And she was a little bit stressed, but I think we'll figure this out going forward. Man, and I'm thinking, it's a stupid PSAT, who cares, right? What happens when, I just think about, dating stuff and the stuff that really gets gnarly, right? Who does that mom want her daughter to go to? The tutor? Oh God, no, not the job description, right? You want to go back to the parent. And so, I have my daughter who's in 5th grade. She is so ready. She could be in 7th grade and it would go without a hitch. And my 7th grade son, he is so ready to run 5th grade and it would be great. He is who he is. He is who he is. And so, I spend my whole world thinking about, elite colleges and blah, 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 blah. And I'm just constantly having to fight, trying to remind myself what are the things that actually really, really matter. It's a challenge.
So let's just, want to take your questions. And just, there's going to, if we have your email, we'll send a handout. It has very detailed suggestions around these major ideas of insisting that teenagers make decisions about their own life. But think of yourself as a consultant to your kid, as opposed to somebody whose job it is to make them be a certain way. As much as you can, being a non-anxious presence, so that you enjoy your life more, and so the kids aren't reacting to your reaction, which can kind of dig things in deeper. And also the suggestions for helping kids and yourself, making sure that we have time to unplug and de-stress, given how toxic stress is for all of us. So there's a lot of detailed suggestions, I think that make sense. And I'll just to tell you that before I take your questions, that I think one of the most useful things that anybody ever told me was I was talking to somebody when my kids were little, and I don't remember the context, but he said, I loved raising teenagers. He said, because every day I got to see, when they came up from school, I got to see who they were deciding to become. And I love that perspective. It wasn't my job to see that they're this successful and do this. My job was to figure out who they want to be. And when I used to do therapy, I used to do a lot of psychotherapy. I used to see a lot of adults. And I was so struck by how many adults in their 40s or 50s would say, I spent my whole life trying to live up to somebody else's expectations. I want to figure out what's important to me. And I just thought, let's take this perspective to our kids. We don't have to be completely wash our hands. They don't do whatever. You can be assertive and say, no, I can't let you do that. I can't support you doing that. But as much as we can, we want kids, unless they're crazy, unless the decisions are crazy, we want them to make decisions.
I absolutely appreciate that the kids need a sense of control and autonomy, and that they need to relax after a very stressful week. And what my son says to me is, and he does work so hard.
Can you hear the back?
My son works really hard during the week, and I absolutely will try to be a consultant, but his way of relaxing on the weekend is if I let him, he could play 8 hours of video games. So I would love to see who he's gonna be, but if you're just playing video games.
Do you know what kind of game he plays?
It's something where you gotta get to the next level. So I feel like it's really addictive, and I feel like his reward center is lighting up like crazy. And it is with other kids, so he does say it's social. But you can't leave the game because then you get sort of like ostracized or something. And I can't leave, and it's dinner time, and it's very. It's not something where it ends and then you can walk away. Then you got to get to the next level.
I mean,
It's addictive.
It's,
Yeah,
it,
it
well,
is,
I
I
mean,
think
you know, it's interesting. There are a couple things. I mean, one of these games are by design addictive.
Yeah.
I mean, because to Bill's point before, I mean, the biggest release of dopamine is the sense of I'm almost there. I'm going to get it. I'm going to get it this time. I actually have a friend who was talked about being at a conference and meeting some neurologists who worked with Microsoft on designing games and like when to give like a little squirt of dopamine and when to give a big squirt of dopamine and how to make these things really compelling. But I also had a great conversation this past week, and I with a kid, and I asked him about, do you play games? And his face lit up. He said, oh yeah. And he went on and told me about all these different games, and they're not you know sort of the typical first-person shooter game. And he said, pull up the graphics on these things. And some of these games are they're fully articulated movies. Some of them, and you sort of make your own decision, right? And based on where it was, different characters would pop up. I mean, it's like, and so from the kid's perspective, it's like it's being an actor in a movie. And there's more money made now in video games than there is in movies because they're $20 billion to make whatever this thing, and so you're not just passively watching a movie, you're actually involved in this. And so, yeah, I mean, these things are really, really compelling. I mean, I would make the suggestion, and I do this with my kids, before I sit there and wag my finger at their games, try playing it yourself so at least you can have an informed criticism. I mean, do you know what I'm saying? I really believe that, partly because if you sit here and tell me that game's so stupid, it's a waste of time, and I don't think that you know anything about it, it's hard for me to hear that. Now, from my perspective, I would say, so listen, pal, I know you work really hard, and these games are how you like to engage with your friends, and they must be fun. I mean, you wouldn't be playing them if they weren't fun, right? But here's the deal: dinner for us is really important. I've read lots of articles about how important dinner is with my son is. So we're having dinner at 6 o'clock, right? And so you can play that game, but at 6 o'clock and then at 6:05, I'm going to say, and if we can't abide by that, then we're going to have to come up with something else, okay? Because I'm not telling you how to do your homework, and I'm not telling you not to play games. But I'm saying that this time is important, and I organize my life around having dinner with you, and I think it would be respectful for you to do the same thing for me.
And there's nothing else he's doing. He could be playing ball, or he could be exercising, or he could be.
I think that the issue for me, so with younger kids, with young kids, where they're exposing to games the first time, you make their use contingent on their being able to limit it and not freak out. And so it's easier when the kids are younger. As they get older, I don't want to see a kid go to college whose parents are still trying to police their use of electronics. And what I say to kids is that my sense is that this may be a serious problem. And one of the things that had me thinking so much about the sense of control was thinking about the most oppositional, explosive kids on the planet. And you can't show them who's boss. And the most effective thing to do is collaborative problem solving. That Ross Greene has popularized this idea with explosive kids and oppositional, defiant kids, that they don't respond by power play. So you say to them, I'm not going to try to use the force of my will to get you to do stuff. And instead, you say, I'm concerned that you spend so much, that the games, they're so cool. There's good research on benefits from them.
but also I'm also concerned about the rest of your life. And you try to negotiate some kind of something so that you say, this makes me really anxious. And I want to figure out something that I can be more comfortable with, because I don't want to pull the plug on this entirely. But if I really feel that some of this is really harmful to your life, then we're going to have to do something. Maybe pull the plug on it for a while, maybe seeing a therapist, maybe doing something. But I think having this conversation in a way where you aren't saying, okay, you only do so much. The kid may feel that his life's not working optimally either. And I think having that conversation, one of the things that I ask every kid I see, I ask every kid, when do you feel happy, when do you feel unhappy? And so you mentioned snow days. This week I saw a kid who said, I feel really happy when it's a snow day, and I wasn't anticipating it. When do you feel unhappy? When I think it's going to be a full snow day and it's only a 2-hour delay. But I ask kids if they tell me about if they aren't doing well in school, or they're anxious about something, or they're angry a lot. I said, is this something you want to change? Would you like this to be different? So I'm looking for buy-in. And I think certainly the video game is the most complicated thing, in part because it's changing so fast. In part because there's research that suggests that playing video games has really important cognitive benefits. It's not crazy anymore for people to think I can make a living doing this. There are people who could make a living. I consulted with a family recently, very bright guy who plays, I can't remember the name of the game, but it's one of these online multiplayer games, and he's in the top 1% of players in the world. He's not good enough to play professionally, but he said, I could do the voiceovers for the competitions. And more people watch this competition than watch the Super Bowl. And so it's a very rapidly changing world. It's like I saw a kid once who was spending all his time playing these games of chance, and he wasn't doing as well in school. And his father had dropped out of Harvard and made a living as a professional gambler. And is genetically wired to be really good at this. And so it wasn't entirely crazy. And so my feeling is that if you play 8 hours a day, you have a talk with your kid, how's the rest of your life work? I'm concerned about it. Is that a concern you share? And if it is there some way I can help you? Or should we talk to somebody? If he's not a problem, how about we talk about somebody, just to kind of talk this out, get somebody to help us figure out how I don't do so anxious about this, and whether there may be somebody that might be in your best interest. But it is really the hardest thing. Yes?
Yeah. What if students can't even begin to conceptualize what their goals might be? So, I'm learning specialist in our high school, so, I'll say to a 9th grader, there's no inherent reason you should get A's. Like what good will they do you? Like what are the reasons that you might want A's, or you might want your grades to go up, or, which is presumably why their parents want them to be getting help. And I mean, that's not the only reason, but let's say the conversation goes there, and they're really clueless. I try to find out if some of them do know what professions they might like, so I suggest working backwards. Okay, you want to be a veterinarian, what would it look like? What would you have to go to college for, and what would your grades need to be, and all of that. But many just don't seem to have the energy or the inclination to engage in that conversation. So what would you suggest for that, for them to begin to think of people empowered to determine their future and to define who they want to be? They don't seem to be there yet.
And my angle is that, certainly you can't make somebody want what they don't want. And you can't make them not want what they want. And I make peace with them. And so, but I do feel that you might say, there's advantages to being a good student. And I just want to make sure you understand what they are. And as somebody who's a C+ student in high school and flunked English my first quarter of my freshman year, about my senior year in high school, and turned in everything late. I mean, it's just hard for me to get too worked up if kids, aren't academically motivated. However, I want kids to understand the way the world is. And a lot of kids who
who want to be a vet and they hate chemistry, and the idea that they're actually going to go to medical school is absurd. But we want to help them understand the way the world is. And so we want to let them, let's think about what the advantages might be, what your life, how it might affect your life, if you in fact you work harder because you got better skills. But I think that as opposed to we certainly we don't want to use fear. We don't want to use fear unnecessarily. I mean, the perfect knowledge, because after the first time you hear that, it just doesn't.
But I guess the issue is, what are the motivators to do homework, for example? I mean, aside from those people who may have a clear idea of what they want in life and therefore see grades as a way to get there. If you don't have that internal motivation then, what can be motivators?
What I tell kids is that I say, I have a lot of kids, and I'll use these words. I say, I don't give a shit about your grades. What I care about is you're developing yourself. And we know that the brain develops according to how it's used. And you know that if you want to do something cool in this world, you're going to have to learn to work hard at something. And I don't really care what it is. And ideally, it's something that you like. That you work hard, because what I want you to do is I want you to work hard enough to get something that you get better and better and better and better at. And I don't care what it is, because when your brain knows how to do that, to work hard at something and have the frustration of not that good now, that you think that they're not yet kind of idea. That's what sculpts the brain to do this work. And I say, I don't care if it's music. The video games is a little bit. It's a question. If they'll work hard at something, I want them to know that we're talking about sculpting the brain. But I tell kids, I want you to work hard. I want you to rest hard. Because what we know is that when you stimulate the brain during the day and you sleep, that stimulation becomes soldered into your brain as you sleep. I mean, most of what you can remember now is because of sleep. So it's really where stuff gets etched into where the connections get formed in your brain is while you sleep. Find something to work on. If it's just one class, I don't care. I tell kids that these people who aren't academic motivated, look, I don't care. You can flunk everything. And I tell about kids who were terrible students. They go off and go to the Navy for a couple of years. They go to a gap year, and they're more mature. And they start at community college, and they can hit the ground running. What I care about is you're developing yourself so you have something useful off of this world, and so you can do something cool that you enjoy. But the ends are you can't get there unless you practice working hard at something.
And sometimes it's not schoolwork. I mean, it's kind of everything ancillary. It's like all the extracurricular activities, right? Or I mean, one of the passion pursuits of pastimes. Who's the author?
Oh yeah, this Reed Larson.
Thank you. I mean, who basically says that, just as Bill says, I mean, that brains really develop when you're working hard at something, right? And so, so much of what we think of cognitive development, we think it's all school-driven, right? We have a sort of very adult-centric view of the world, and a lot of times it may be just because there's some ideally something other than video games, but there's some pastime that kids are just passionately working on. I mean, I have a colleague, a friend who's in upstate New York, works for Cabin up there, and he's a carpenter, and he's a Finnish carpenter, and when you mention this guy's name, people almost genuflect because he's that skilled at what he does, and he went to Middlebury, which is a lovely place to go, and blah blah blah. But his success as an adult has nothing to do with the fact that he went to Middlebury, right? So when did he start? Building things and making things and realize that he had a talent for it, right? And so whether it's artistic ability, the arguably the most well compensated skill, if you want to pick one from Howard Gardner's multiple intelligences, is interpersonal intelligence, right? Emotional intelligence, right? And how do you develop emotional intelligence? Probably not in your classroom so much, right? All the outside of school activities, you're on student government, you're on prom committee, or whatever it happens to be, and learning how to work well with other people. You don't probably get that when the teacher tells you what to do and you do what the teacher tells her. Okay, that's one skill, but that's a different thing altogether from navigating other things.
I told the story last night about this kid who I saw 5 years ago, who had 2.4 grade point average in his 11th grader in Montgomery High School. And just telling me, I didn't know anything about the kid when I because it was one of my colleagues' clients. And so I was supposed to work with him for an hour, so I just started talking with him and found out that he said, I do no homework, I never read any of my assigned reading, I plagiarize, and I kind of manipulate my teachers into passing me. But he was passionate about the Montgomery County Rescue Squad. He was completely devoted to it, completely. And I told him that I could care less about his grades. I told him this whole story about he flunk everything about Montgomery College. And I just tried to help him understand that I actually said to him before I knew anything about his parents or both university professors, I said, am I the only one who thinks you ought to drop out of high school? Because it seemed like a complete waste of his adolescent energy. And the thing is that people are focusing now on how completely talented and powerful the adolescent brain is. The first 20 years of research on teenage brain, mainly it's kind of a work in progress, immature frontal cortex. And now people are focusing on this incredible creativity and adaptive power. You think Beatles, you think Bob Dylan, you think Olympic athletes who are 14 years old and have this tremendous drive and determination. And I said, it's a waste of time to be faking much of your life. And it turned out, so he researched, and it turned out that he couldn't be in the rescue squad if he didn't stay in school. So he stayed in school, and I told him that I don't give a shit about your grade, that I want you to work hard. And we got a tutor for him, and mother called me 2 months later and said he has a 3.6 grade point average. And it was really kind of a cool story. It was somebody trying to tell him the truth and trying to give him some way to kind of connect with. I started out by saying, I think you ought to drop out. And his decision to stay in school kind of, I think, fuel this kind of increase of energy and motivation. Other questions? Yes?
Our covers ADHD, and executive function issues. But she can be motivated for specific things, but not for, she'll do homework, travel, she get frequent flyer miles. That's I mean, it's been suggested to us to engage an ADHD coach for her. And we're kind of struggling with that because I'm not sure another professional coming in to help her will do something because she really, what is it taking her to another room, having somebody else kind of react? I mean, but do you have perspective? Do you think that would be helpful? One more person when she doesn't have internal motivation.
How old are you?
13. But she's always been this way. This is not adolescent.
So my angle is, would you like it to be easier to get home? And if the answer is yeah, would you like somebody to help you?
But what if the answer is no? Well, she doesn't really care if the homework. She doesn't really care that it's not handed in.
Yeah.
It's all kind of at her.
Yeah, and my opinion is that if we take this idea as whose problem is it, I want her to feel this is her problem. And I think if we try to protect her from herself, she won't feel it as her problem. And so my feeling is that you can set some limits on you. She can't watch TV all day, and she can't go out with her friends constantly. She's not doing any more. But my sense is that say to her, she says, no, I'm doing fine. I'm getting good. What's the big deal? Then you say, if you decide you want to get us to work hard, if it's just too hard to get started in this stuff, and you want some help, there's probably people who can help you. And I personally am a big fan of peer tutoring, of getting high school kids to work with younger kids. They're much cheaper, and kids tend to work really well for other kids. Better, in fact, many cases better than work for that. And a lot of kids that they've used, I want to have another kid, just to come out, be a warm body, just kind of sit and coach a little bit. And a lot of kids will work really hard for other kids. And but again, my feeling is you ought. And for a 13-year-old, it's probably the least important thing in the world is how motivated, how well she does in school in 7th grade or 8th grade. It's kind of
certainly 8th grade tends to be the nadir of most people's lives. I once said, what's that?
I think 7th is the nadir.
Well, then, yeah, it's so many times these. I test this kid years. Actually, I did family therapy. This family probably close to 30 years ago, and the dad was really upset because the son was having a rough patch, and his dad started crying. The kid's in 8th grade. He said, "This should be the happiest time in his life." I said, "Well, obviously you skipped 8th grade."
I have a friend who had daughters, and his daughter, when got to junior, her grades started to slide, and they went from A's down to B's, and he was really concerned about it. And he said, "Well, if you get all A's, I will give you, some big reward. Try to push her to motivate her to do this." And she was the kid who was sort of driven by that, and she said, "Okay, and got all A's and took Dad's money, whatever it happened to be." Felt pretty good about how that worked out, sort of little carrot there. And so then 2 years later, the second daughter came through and had almost the exact same experience, and he sort of gave her the same proposal: if you can get your grades back up to such and such, I'll get you whatever it was that you wanted. And her grades just continued to slide. He said, "Well, shoot, that was not the plan." And she was motivated for different things. There's a really neat motivational thing called trimetrics, and it basically talks about people can be motivated by utility, that can be aesthetics, right? It's just all about beauty, In her case, it was all social. And so he spent some time thinking about this and realized it. And then so he went and talked to the college counselor at the school and said, I was talking with Mr. Knox about your school. And in case you didn't notice, the average GPA at your school is a 3.3. Your 2.9 is lower than the average. So it worries me a little bit about it if you want to go to have more choices for school. But the other thing that Mr. Knox was able to tell us is that actually you're being in 2.9, that actually hurts your friends because it pulls down the average grade for the whole school, and that actually hurts them a little bit because the school doesn't look as good. And he walked away. And so she then went and got a 3.8, not because it made her dad happy or she cared about the grades, but she thought she was helping her friends.
That's a cool story. And there's a lot of kids that I see who all they wanted, I say, well, what do you like to do more than anything else? And to hang out with my friends. And I say, I know that that's true. That I want you to hang out with your friends a lot, because you're going to make a living doing something that's interpersonal. And I said, you're really practicing, you're hanging out with your friends, and you're helping to solve their problem, whatever you're doing, you're practicing for your career. And I think that as opposed to, it's more important that you be doing something else. I want to be framing for those really socially engaged kids, that this is something that they do. I had a kid, a kindergarten kid, who was constantly called on the carpet for talking to his friends. And he was crying when they went from school, and his mom said, "Well, honey, we have a job. You'll be able to talk with people all day. You don't have a job like that." He says, "Can I get a job now?"
Yeah. When you use the phrase obsessively motivated, bells went off in my head. It just perfectly describes my 9th grade daughter who comes home from school, spends 15 minutes on snack, and immediately hits the books, but she's slow at processing, getting herself organized and executive functioning, but she gets so stressed out that, of course, then her self-organization goes down the tubes, and her ability to focus and get her homework done, and it piles up, and she has these panic attacks. So I don't know if you have some strategies for reducing that excessive level of motivation. Our approach has been kind of hands-off. We're available when you need us. Trying to see if she'll get herself organized, and we'll support her when she needs to. But
is she really perfectionistic? Is she?
Yes.
Okay. A couple of things. I spend more time with kids who are perfectionistic than I wish they were less perfectionistic, and part of it is there's a fear that story about the girl years ago. She had a 1590 on the SAT and 1600 was perfect. And burst into tears, not tears of joy, in case you're wondering. And I looked at her and I said, Julie, you're a crack addict. She looked at me and said, you've had, what, 437 consecutive days, and if you got to see, you would burst into tears. And with all the fury of this little body, never gets. And it wasn't like, oh, you silly tutor boy, go away, you're probably, I don't know. It was palpable fear. And so it's very easy, I think, for kids to be, sometimes kids don't hear the messages that we're trying to give them, right? And so, it can be sort of whiff of smoke that she feels like she's gotten from her teacher or classmate. If you get an A, you get a B, well, you can just cross off the whole. And so it's possible that she has a set of beliefs in her that just aren't true. There's a great writer named Bruce Feiler who talks about how helpful it is to children, for us as adults, to talk about the ups and downs we've had, back to sort of scars, and get us to where we are. Because for children, particularly if your husband are high performing, kids can have this idea that Bill just popped fully formed from the head of Zeus, right? Right. And so the things that we are good at, ideally we're all fantastic at our jobs and we're well paid for it. We have nice vacations, and ideally we're the best parents that there are, and that's where I come to talk to Bill and me. Listen to Bill and me talk about this, right? But the things that we're really lousy at. The number of years I studied foreign languages terribly, don't ask me to say anything in French. It's just not pretty, right? And so one of the things that Bruce Fowler talks about is when you have the opportunity to tell stories about yourself, about your husband, about your parents, and kind of the ups and downs, it's a lot more accurate model of the world. And so, I invoke Bill over and over and over. He got a what? What's your story? To go to Washington to have a GPA of 2.5. A little bit overachiever. 2.7. Go there, which is why did I waste so much energy? Bring up that high. But I also, from my perspective, one of the things I talk with my kids, again, always, sort of testing this kind of thing, is about how important it is to be rested, and about why exercise matters. Now, kids have heard a million things about exercise, but one of my favorite things is that the neurons that are created are birthed when people are exercising. Not only are they smarter, they're faster in reactions, but they're less susceptible to stress. And so the neurons that are created, they put people through this regimen, and then they had them stop exercising, so they can see that it wasn't effective exercise, but the neurons that last for about 2 weeks, and then put them in a stressful situation, and the neurons are stressed, but they normalize a whole lot more quickly, right? So there's a lot to be said for, now Times just had a great thing that you don't, actually for longevity, you don't have to run fast, you just got to run a little bit. So you see, even light jogging is vigorous enough. So, I tend to, at least with my kids, is really sort of push the things that I think are the inputs to healthy brains. And basically anything that makes healthy bodies makes healthy brains. And so we're back to exercise, we're back to sleep, we're back to meditation. Bill's been doing transcendental meditation for 40 years. I started 2 years ago. I probably won't catch up. Right.
And I think that I don't want to try to treat kids for problems they don't think they have. So if the kid's having panic attacks, but the kids typically are open to the help. And we want them to say that we want to treat anxiety. Because if we don't want the grooves in the brain to get too deep. Because then you condition the brain to be anxious and overreactive maybe forever. And you increase your risk of depression. So I want to try to talk kids into treating depression. If they're anxious, to treating it, because there's very good evidence that you treat anxiety that lowers your risk for other problems. But for kids who insist, I see a lot of kids who their fingernails are just bitten down to the nub, and they say, I'm not anxious. So I'd say, then I have a conversation. What would it look like if you were? How sure would they be if you were? But I think that we want to try to get kids if they're open to talking to somebody about it. Anything else? Yes.
And what if your kid doesn't have a problem? And what if your kid, you say you treat kids who have a problem, who want to be helped through regular. So your kid doesn't want to do homework, and they don't really care what they become as an adult because it'll work out. And we have this whole iteration of late bloomers. I think all kids now are just developing later. And so what do you do if you do problem solving and whatever, and there isn't a passion? You know, I understand completely, you don't have to go to school, work hard at something. How do you hook in to work hard at something?
You know, I don't think that anybody, with kids who don't want to work hard, I don't think that anybody knows how to turn that on for them. But again, I want to be the kid's father. And I saw a girl who, when she was 14, her mother came to consult with me. I'd followed her since she was 5. And the concern was she didn't have any passions. And she didn't have any passions. And 6 months later, this girl found out about the Washington Animal Rescue League, and within a couple of months, knew all the rescued animals in the whole Virginia, Maryland, D.C. area, and was completely passionate about it, completely engaged, and that morphed into, she did an internship working with young children, and that passion morphed into it. But my point is that the mother didn't see it coming. I didn't see it coming. And so I think we want to help kids understand reality. So if they aren't working hard at things, we want to have some conversation. Maybe text them or send them an email about, I'm concerned that if you don't work hard at something, it's going to limit your options in life. I'm not going to badger you about it. I'm not going to bring it up every chance I get. But I want you to know that I take this, that I'm concerned about this. That if there's anything I can do to help, if you're going to talk to somebody about it, I'm going to facilitate.
And I think the other thing is, that prefrontal cortex starts to develop, that motivation can come along. It's not there, it's not there, it's not there, it's all of a sudden it's there. I got an email 3 years ago from a family I worked with. The two older sisters were highly academic. The son, who followed in the footsteps, was decidedly not. And so it was my job to get him enthusiastic about geeky vocabulary words. And I'm sort of the spaz, but he really wasn't buying it. And I got and he did fine, and he got into a school that was fine, from the expectations. And I got an email from his mom. It said, I thought you'd like to know about an update on Matt. Love to hear an update on that. So the sophomore year of Matt, when Matt was in college, something switched. He fell in love with Spanish. He became really passionate about learning Spanish. He sort of became this budding linguist. He went back and found your box of vocabulary cards. He learned them all. He got another box of vocabulary words. He became this reader that he never was, and now he's applying to law school. And when this kid was 16, if you told me that he was going to be a lawyer, I just would have told you were just absolutely out of your mind, right? And it's just, and who knows why? Maybe because it was too long of a shadow that his sisters passed. Lots of possibilities. But who he was when he was 22 was decidedly not who he was when he was 16. I'll tell you one last story. This is one of my favorite kids. This is 15 years ago. The most ADHD child in the world. In the world, right? So when we have early ADHD, was the kid who's bouncing off the walls. This was this boy. It was quick story. So he went to an independent school, and he got in a pen war. And we sit there and sort of get with felt tip pens, right? And he got in this free-ranging pen war with his friend, and they couldn't stop themselves. They were wildly impulsive. He gets sent down to the principal's, the headmaster's office, and so the two of them are sitting there. They're sort of sitting there in the headmaster's office. When the headmaster's sitting there yelling at them. And then the phone rings, and he goes, excuse me, and turns his back. He's told the headmaster has his back turned. He sits there and sees on the headmaster's desk a little stamp from the headmaster from the desk of headmaster so-and-so. And he sees it, and the headmaster's right there, but he has his back turned. He thinks, it's my moment. And he grabs it, and he goes, like this. And he hits his friend right in the forehead. They're sitting thinking, how many days have you already had detention? And so far, your brain has to go, this might not be a good idea, right? But he does it anyway. He's suspended from detention for the last 3 years. When he comes back after college, I get this email. Hey, Ned, it's Brendan. I graduated college. I'm thinking about going to get an MBA. Could you help me with the GMAT? Happy to help with you. And he comes. He's like, hey, good to see you. How are you? And I'm just like, I was so sad, right? Because that manic energy is just gone. But people do develop. There was that, again, this silly article about, is your first grader ready for college? And this tutor from Westchester, glad we don't live there, and she says, well, if you're going to be in the Olympics, you really have to start your kid when he's 5 or 6. And I just, So this is sort of model that Bill and I talked about for 2 or 3 years, is the idea that our children, they're like these little plants, right? And they're growing and they're growing. And so many of us feel like, we're like Edward Scissorhands, right? We're overly vigorous gardeners with our shears. And we need to prune them and make them like this perfect little topiary, right? And the problem is, by and large, we have no idea what kind of tree it's supposed to be.
I think we all need hindsight, because, the passion will come, and we know that, and there's lots of success stories. But when you're the one living with the 15-year-old.
I agree. And, maybe I should take your opinion, you can take mine, and we'll just split back at age 22.
When you got kids who lack, who aren't really motivated for much of anything, then it's hard. And ideally, that kids eventually become worrisome to them. Yeah.
The one thing I was going to say though about the whole motivation thing, and I've got kids in college and I've got young kids, and I've got kids all over the place and all their friends, is the one thing is when you have some of these kids that aren't motivated, and then they start, or kids that were motivated, and then they start using pot, that really messes with their brain. And one thing we're seeing is that is a motivation destroyer. And if you do have a kid that is particularly motivated or becomes unmotivated, you might want to start testing them, because it's so prevalent right now. It's like water on the weekends, how much drug use is being used in this area.
It's a really good point. I mentioned in my talk last night. If we see kids whose motivation has dropped precipitously, it's almost always depression or heavy pot use. And so, yeah, and it's very hard. And kids now are talking about pot as this is my medication. Because they think about it. Other kids are on antidepressants or anti-anxiety medicine. This is my anti-anxiety medicine. And many of the kids that I see, including kids with ADHD, especially kids with ADHD, say, I do better when I smoke pot. What they mean by that is I don't worry about all the stuff I'm not doing. And what I tell kids with ADHD is you got two choices. One is you can create a life, and the second is you can smoke pot. Because people with ADHD can't do those. I mean, I think there are people. I think there are kids who just, school comes so easily to them, they can smoke a lot of pot. I mean, so some people tell me that validate by school being potheads, and I think that's true. But for people with ADHD, I just tell them, you got two choices. Because your prefrontal cortex doesn't activate anyway. And if you're high most of the time, you aren't going to worry about stuff, but you're not going to do anything either. And so you got a choice. And I try to talk them into learning to meditate and learning to really get exercise.
Can you repeat that phrase again so we can write it?
Which one?
You tell the ADHD kids they can either do pot
I can tell you, two choices. One is you can create a life.
Okay.
It requires sustained effort, really working hard at something, and handling a high level of stress, to becoming more tolerant of stress. Or you can smoke a lot of pot. You can't do both. And simply because to do something, to create a life, it requires sustained energy and effort. And it requires being able to tolerate stressful situations and not give up. And people with ADHD, the prefrontal cortex is already not very well developed. You just can't give up. And so that's why.
I didn't you guys.